Well, welcome to our first session, what I'm calling Missouri's ecological and sociological cornerstones. I think we all know what a cornerstone is, something of great importance that everything else depends upon. And that's a very good definition of our upland oaks here in Missouri, or across the eastern United States for that matter. Not only for wood products, but also for animals, large, small, and those that are in the air. But exactly where are the oaks and what kind of species are we talking about? So to kind of lay the foundation there's a really neat website out there. If you Google individual tree species parameter maps, this is something that's maintained by the U.S. Forest Service's Forest Inventory and Analysis section in cooperation with the folks at Esri. And so you can go in there and you can actually do a search on species and then what kind of parameters you want to look at. Fairly intuitive if you've played with the geographical information systems before. And if not, there's a nice tutorial on there that can kind of guide you through. But I wanted to kind of set this because this is really a nice place to be able to just see the importance. So this is a map, when I just call it up, of all the oaks in general. And you can see how the eastern United States just lights up. But let's take a little bit deeper dive if we can. And so when we look at it, we can look at this and we have what we call our white oaks and our red oaks. Now there are a number of species out there, more than just the four that I'm going to show you from each, if you will, subgroup. So in our white oaks, we have white oak. We also have post oak, chinkapin, and burr. Those are the ones, and they light up here. You can see that the redder it is, this is, there are more prevalent of oaks that are out there. These are actual number of trees per acre that are on the ground. And again, those are little dots, if you will, and each of those are maintained by the hundreds of thousands of plots that are maintained nationwide in this forest inventory and analysis database. Here in Missouri, that represents, I believe, something like 6,000 individual inventory plots that are visited about every 5 years. That they are a subset is inventoried. And yes, some of these do fall on private lands only with the permission of the landowner, and those points are kept, if you will, secret, so nobody can go in and get on people. I'm getting way too much in the weeds here. Three, two, one. Well, welcome to our first session. Three, two, one. Welcome to session one. And that is oaks, Missouri's ecological and sociological cornerstones. When we think of a cornerstone being something of great importance that everything else depends upon, that is very true when we talk about our oaks here in Missouri, not only from an economic standpoint, but also from the ecological foundation that supports animals, both small and large, and those that fly in the air. But what are we talking about when we say oaks? So there is a database out that you can search yourself called the Individual Tree Species Parameter Maps. It's maintained by the U.S. Forest Service in cooperation with the folks at Esri. So when I call up and I just ask for, show me the prevalence of oaks nationwide, all species of oaks, you can see, well, of course, we have, it's basically an Eastern United States phenomena. We do have some out in the Imperial Valley there in California. But when we look at that, we can parse that out even more, and we can look at what we call our white oaks and our red oaks groups. When we look at that, that looks like our white oaks. Something of the four major ones that we have here are white, post, chinkapin, and burr. And so the redder the area, that's the greater concentration of oaks. And we're talking here just based upon the number of oaks that are on an acre basis. When we look add also into there the red oaks, those are more common ones. Those are black and scarlet, northern red, and pin oak. So you can see the Missouri Ozarks is quite a hotbed of our oak species, but not only that, we've got them throughout the state. Now, oaks are the largest tree genus in North America. Comprises 90 species, and 58 of those are what we call tree size. There are some of the smaller scrub oaks that are in California, lesser ones that are in the southeastern United States, but 58 out of the 90 are tree size. And they provide excellent hardmast. Hardmast are acorns. More than 100 different vertebrates consume those acorns, from deer and turkey to wood duck, black bear. Acorns are very nutritious. Usable energy, 78%, compared to other sorts of energy that our wildlife can extract. Soft fruits, herbaceous leaves, woody leaves, buds and twigs, but acorns are far and above the richest source of usable energy for wildlife. Plus, we have some 22 species of acorn weevils that enhance the fat and protein content of those acorns. So while some might not produce an acorn or an oak, they do play a vital role in the nutrient balance of our wildlife. They also serve as a host to over 500 species of Lepidoptera larvae. Things ranging from the oak beauty moth to the greater oak dagger moth, the polyphemus or polyphemus moth, and the litter moth, even the moths that rely upon dead and decaying matter on the forest floor. The I'll get it out. The polyphemus moth or polyphemus moth, those are really in the source of critical, the cocoons on there are for our bats. Compare that to some of our other species. Dogwoods only support about 126 species of Lepidoptera larvae, all the way down to spicebush and redbud, much less. So oaks play a huge part in setting up the food chain. The larvae are important for insectivores, like we say, for red-eyed vireos, cardinals, magnolia warblers, cerulean warblers, and golden crowned kinglets. Frank Thompson with the Forest Service in a later session, he'll go into these at length and kind of show you the how they're interrelated and the importance that our oaks play. But we can't also forget our nightjars, our Chuck Will's widow, and our whippoorwills, owls, and even bats. Like I say, they feed off of some of those, the bats in particular, and the owls, they'll be feeding off of those polyphemus moths. And if you don't know about this book, I highly suggest you go out and purchase it. The Nature of Oaks. It's the rich ecology of our most essential native trees by Doug Tallamy. Doug is probably one of the best entomologists when it comes to understanding oaks. And this book kind of takes an oak seedling through the course of a year, or not only oak seedling, but an oak tree, much like Leopold does with the Sand County Almanac. So it's a really easy and fascinating read. I know this really opened up my eyes to a world of oaks that maybe I really didn't fully appreciate at the time. But we say not only from an ecological standpoint, but also from a sociological, economic standpoint, Missouri's forest products industries contribute $10.3 billion a year to the state's economy. put that into perspective, as far as from the ag sector goes, the ag sector is about $100 billion. So quite a significant piece. And each of these green dots, these are represents where sawmills or various wood processing facilities are located in the state. And so not only does it contribute to the economic engine of a region, it also contributes to the community, if you will, the sociological fabric of that town, because a lot of these towns, particularly in the Ozarks, in the wood basket, they rely heavily upon the forest, not only for the products today, but the products tomorrow. So these folks look at it in the long term, and it's not only the loggers and the mills, it's all those industries that support our wood products industry. In particular, when we look at white oaks, Missouri is the top white oak stave producer in the world. Now, the cooperages might be all located points east, but again, being the wood basket, it is the top oak stave producer. On any one given day, our largest manufacturer of barrels produces about 10,000 barrels each and every day. And that's just one of the largest producer. There are several others out there. So you can see it really is a drive. And when we look at white oak in particular, from forest all the way to the finished barrel, this is truly a value added product here, forest product for the Show Me State. So let's just the dynamics of a forest. A nice healthy forest, we want to see something that can not only produce our forest products, but provide our food for the wildlife and the other ecological services, clean water, filtering our for our streams, providing clean air, and recreational, opportunities. But what does this look like? I mean, this is a typical picture of one that we might say where we've got maturing oaks, we've got oaks on the forest floor. And so all of the different, from little guys all the way up to ones that will then eventually be harvested. So what that looks like graphically is something like this: the ideal number of white oaks by diameter class, if you will. So number of trees is along the y-axis, and then 2-inch diameter classes, and we measure a tree 4.5 feet above the ground. Diameter breast height, or DBH, that's a term that you'll hear from time and time again. But going all the way on the left, from those saplings that are 1 to 3 inches in diameter, all the way up to those that are reaching harvestable size. And you can see we want to see this is what we call a reverse J. In other words, we've got more trees in the lower classes because this is the survival of the fittest, if you will. And so if we've got to have trees in the smaller class to then recruit to supply trees in the larger classes as time goes on. Now that's ideal. So what does it really look like? So this is based upon, again, that forest inventory and analysis data. Those orange bars, that's the state of Kentucky. The blue bars are Missouri. So again, just points out one, being the Missouri being a very rich wood basket, if you will. But you'll notice these are kind of got a bell-shaped curve to them. And what we don't see in either state's case, are those smaller trees. We don't have those. We wish we did, but we don't. So what's going on there? And really, we need to step back, particularly here in Missouri, but this was something that was happening across the eastern United States. So we look prior to 1880, prior to when European settlers came into our wood basket of the Ozarks. What it looked like was this. We had open Ozark pine and oak pine stands in Shannon County down in southeast Missouri. As we went west into more of the prairies and north into the prairies, we had these white oak savannas. But again, we have all of these, we had these open woodlands. If you can see that image in the right, if you look closely, you're going to see those little black dots underneath the canopy. Those are people. And folks like Schoolcraft and the historical documentation said that you could actually drive a wagon through the landscape. Historically, fire was a frequent tool. not only of our Native Americans, but also in the absence of Native Americans, when the grasses would build up to a certain level where it could carry a fire, and then we'd either have lightning naturally caused fires, or we would have set by our Native American folks. But about every 6 to 10 years, they would go through, and the forest, the woodlands would experience a fire. Now, where does this map come from? This comes from the tree ring lab here at the University of Missouri, where they've gone out across the country and taken what we call tree cookies from remnant stumps, and they were able to go back and actually trace the fire frequency. So you can see here in Missouri, it was about every 6 to 10 years. And so that kept things open. And you'll see why that's important when we talk a little bit about the ecology here in a sec. Then we had from 1880 to 1920, unfortunately, the era of exploitation. So, it's amazing how much could be done with a crosscut saw, but quite a bit. This was before the days of chainsaws. And the trams that frequented, that were built across the through the ravines, the valleys, and along the ridge tops, extracting wood from the Ozarks at a pretty phenomenal rate, leading to such large mills as what we found down in Grandin, Missouri at that time in the mid 1900s. That was mid 19s, if you will. That was Grandin Mill was the largest processor of hardwood lumber and pine lumber in the country. And what it left to then, after it was the cut out and get out. Then the folks that were left, they were to subsistence farming. And again, there from open range, they kept things, fairly open, if you will. And one thing about oaks, they have a tendency to resprout. So you had all of this beginning to happen. You had the complete diminution of our original forest, and then kind of opened up. Then that led to, then we had our fire prevention era from about 1910. So as the cut was playing out up till really present day, 1910 was the big burn out in the Pacific Northwest. There were also some significant fires in the lake states, but it brought to the public attention where the smoke from those fires, much like the dust from the Dust Bowl era, when it drifted east, there was that much, think like the Canadian fires we experienced last year, got the folks' attention. And this was also at the time that when the Forest Service was brand new. So they were put out to the charge, fire was bad, put it out at all costs. They had what they called a 10 o'clock rule, that if fire got going, they had to put it out. And of course, then we also had our greatest ad campaigner, Smokey Bear. That's the original cub there, 1944, leading to where it says prevent forest fires. And you can imagine nowadays, though, that has changed to prevent wildfires, because as we say, we know fire can be a useful tool. But back then, we had everything that was cut out, and then no fire, to where fire actually favors our oak species, doesn't favor our others. So now then we just had a situation coming on where everything could grow and nothing was kind of kept in check, if you will. So what that leads us to is kind of today, we look back and the blue bars are growth and the red bars are harvest. So if you look at it, we're not weeding the garden. We are growing more wood than we're extracting. And why is that a bad thing? Well, one, it does allow for the forest to kind of stagnate and not be as resilient and resistant, if you will, to insect and disease attack. Other studies we're beginning to find, even those older growth forests, they're not sequestering as much carbon as a younger forest will if it's being managed to stimulate growth. Won't get into all that. There are pros and cons of both sides, but the bottom line here is we are growing more wood than we're harvesting. And what that looks like is this is a typical Missouri forest today. It looks, if it's green, it's good. But what's happening is because of the, again, think back to when everything was cut over, oaks tend to sprout. And oaks tend to sprout, will give doubles and even triples. That's when you go out, or twins. So if you go out in the woods, you'll see these doubles and triples. A lot of those are a function of all of our past practices. But when an oak sprouts, if you had 100 stumps and it sprouts twice, now you've got twice the amount of wood trying to grow on that acre of ground. So our carrying capacity is far exceeded. Plus, we have other things that have set the stage out there. But that's one of the main drivers. If you look at it in the wintertime, you can kind of see that you just, when you look through there. But what's going on is light isn't able to reach the forest floor. So why do we know, or how do we know that this is a problem? Well, and one we have here is, again, we'll mention here in the White Oak Initiative in a sec, but one of their first research projects they did was to do a white oak regeneration spatial analysis. And this was led by the folks here at the School of Natural Resources. If you want to do a QR code, you can pull this report. Kind of technical, but I want to kind of point out one point in particular, and that is what we call the upland oak reproduction, the presence and absence by type. So if we look at seedlings, that image on the left, those are ones that are diameters less than 1 inch, but they've got a height of greater than 12 inches. So then a 12-inch, up to about 1 inch in diameter. And here you might think red is bad, but actually red, or that salmon pink, is good. So you see, we have a lot of regeneration going on in the Ozarks, even in Kentucky and Tennessee. Not so much in Pennsylvania. They've got a huge, in New York, and they've got a huge deer problem up there, density. But here in Missouri, looks pretty good. But then if you look at the saplings, those that are at 1 to 3 inches, now again, blue is bad. You see, we don't have a lot of those 1 and 3 inches. Something's happening between the time those acorns germinate and reaching that 1 to 3 inch diameter class. And so we know we've got an issue, a problem. So the solution, really, it's all about light. And this kind of sets the stage for what John and others will be talking about in future presentations. And it's about management. So what that looks like is, here's an unmanaged woods. And we have, full sunlight at the top of the canopy going down all the way to the forest floor, where you have deep shade. So you don't have a lot of light, if any. We have our main canopy, and then we have our mid-story, those trees that are represented in the darker color. And then we have our seedlings down below. So what we tend to see here is we get small, low vigor, what we call this advanced regeneration. So think back to, not this past fall, but 2 years ago, we had a bumper white oak crop. And there are tons of little seedlings out there. If you actually look in the forest floor, you'll see these guys. They'll be only about a couple of inches, maybe 6 inches tall. That's because oaks, when in the first few years, they're producing root systems. They don't spend a lot of time growing above ground, and there's a reason for that. I won't say anything more. I don't want to take thunder away from other folks. But seedlings get established, but you get this slow loss of this cohort. It's something, if we do not allow those seedlings to grow, after about 10 years, they might be putting down a root system the first few years, but eventually they've got to be able to capture sunlight to grow. And if you don't have the sunlight hitting the forest floor, you lose that cohort. So you'll get slow to zero height growth. And then, like I say, you'll get the ultimate loss of the cohort. So what does that look like? So here's, again, our typical unmanaged forest. And actually, if you looked up, I could probably get you some other images there. You would see even less blue than that, than you do green. And this guy is really not happy because, again, under these, you've got these stately oaks, and you think, wow, this is a pretty good forest. It's open, park-like, it looks really good underneath. But then you start looking around and you go, where are the smaller trees? And in this case, that whole cohort has been lost of the small germinate seedlings. So what one form of management, and John will talk more about this, shelterwood management, where one thing we can do is we can remove this midstory. Here, back east, that midstory is sugar maple, it's beech, things of that nature. Here it can be sugar maple in the river hills, it can be red maple in the Ozarks, but more frequently too, it's going to be things like dogwood and ironwood and some of these other species. I'm not saying we eliminate everything again in the forest, but again, you've got to take out this midstory or really weed the garden. So when you do that, you'll get good growth, about 30 to 50% full sunlight. But if we go in and we even remove some of the larger trees, remove some of the overstory and select those that where their canopies will respond to that growth. Larger canopies produce more acorns. They also produce more wood on the tree. So you kind of have your cake and eat it too there. And that when we do that, we get our best growth. We'll get sunlight hitting the forest floor at 75, in excess of 75% full sun. And here's what it looks like. You open up the forest stand, lot more blue. And now you've got not only cohort, those young seedlings can then grow up into here. These are, waist high, chest high saplings beginning to happen. Shelterwood management, sometimes when no seedlings exist, like we say in these mature forests, we've got to start from acorns. And so again, harvesting some of those trees, selecting the good seed producers, that's a good thing. So this all led to something that was the White Oak Initiative. It started a couple of years back. I'm going to briefly touch upon it, and you'll have a link here where you can get more information. But the overall vision and goal of this initiative is to ensure the long-term sustainability of America's upland oaks and the economic, social, and conservation benefits derived from these oak-dominated forests. What does that look like? The partners, now the ones that are in red, those are all the state agencies, and you'll see the Missouri Department of Conservation is in there. But more importantly, you see the ones that are in black. Those are folks like Brown-Forman, Independent Stave, Beam, as in Jim Beam, the Kentucky Distillers Association, Robinson Stave, Sazerac. So those are folks that are really helped put the financial backing into this project. But you can see it literally is a cornucopia of both state and private federal entities coming together to realize that we've got an issue where if we want to maintain our oaks and those wildlife communities that depend upon them, we've got to do something and address this lack of smaller diameter trees. And here is the QR code. You can scan it, or you can go out and just the White Oak Initiative or White Oak Initiative and plug that into your search engine. You'll get this nice, what I call a coffee table read. It's very comprehensive. It's not, but it's easy to read, and it's got case studies and landowner testimonials, if you will, from across the Eastern United States. So it's an easier read than that other publication I was telling you about, where we were looking at just how many seeds were out there and seedlings and everything. This is a pretty good read. The long-term vision of the initiative is by 2070, at least 100 million acres of forest within the central hardwood region. And that's basically, if you took Missouri and went north, and Missouri go east to the mid-Atlantic, so the central hardwood, over to Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Michigan, in that area, down to Tennessee. That's what we mean by the central hardwood region, 100 million acres. Now that's far out. Let's bring this home a little bit. they're saying by 2032, okay, we're going to do 3 million acres of, that are going to will have been treated to establish white oak seedlings or to release those saplings that are there, increasing the current number of white oak acres in those younger age classes. Even closer, so near-term targets, and we're, golly, 2024 when this was put out. The pandemic kind of put a little dent in this when these targets were originally set, but we're pretty close to some of these. That we'd have in that central hardwood region, we'd have 4,000 practitioners and logging operators receiving guidelines on how to manage our oaks. We would have 500 to 1,000 practitioners trained on these management guidelines. So it's one thing to be aware, but then get them to be properly trained. We would have 50,000 landowners reached with information about oak sustainability, much like what you're getting in this webinar series. And from that 50,000, 5,000 landowners connected with practitioners and have plans for restoring oaks on their property. From that, we're going to actually then have 1,500 actually managing their property, and with an emphasis on our upland oaks, white oak in particular. And then we're going to have 100,000 acres treated to establish white oak seedlings, or oak seedlings rather, and to release those saplings. So really kind of keeping our targets, in check and realistic. So, and we'd also increase the number of demonstration areas on both public and private lands that would highlight these quality oak forests. So what does that look like here in Missouri? We're going to have 660 forest practitioners and logging operators receiving guidelines, receiving the information. From that, we're actually going to have 80 to 160 practitioners trained on management on these guidelines. We're going to engage over 8,000 landowners with this information. And from that, we're going to have a little north of 800 landowners actually connected with practitioners and having plans, developing plans, and implementing plans. And then we're saying that 250 will follow through managing their property for upland oak with an emphasis on white oak. So this is in the near term, 16,000 acres, north of 16,000 acres by 2024 would be either the acres are going to be treated or for weeding the garden or planting white oaks. And then increasing the number of demonstration areas in or on public and private lands, highlighting the quality of forests. How do we do that? Is we're actually looking at the life of the forest from large saw timber to a new forest up until the next cycle. You can see we kind of break these out, and this is where John will talk into it. Also, Brian will talk about it in the wildlife and management concerns and practices, as well as Frank. That we're looking at these brown ones, those are our regeneration practices that we have. And then we have what we call establishment practices, and then something that we'll call the tending practices. And these are all the ones that will be, again, covered in future webinars. So clear cut, that's where in some cases we do have to start over. All the trees are removed at once. It's sustainable if large oak seedlings are established prior to that harvest. We have shelter wood, where you're going to remove some of the existing forest in a series of harvests to provide small increases in light. And here in the Ozarks, actually in Missouri, we can get by with something called single tree and group selection, just because we have drier Ozark sites and we have stump sprouts. So wetter Missouri sites, larger group openings might be required again. So something in that more uneven age, what we call management. But these are some of the practices that can be implemented. We can also look at mid-story removal, removing again those trees that are present below the upper canopy of the forest to benefit those small oak seedlings and saplings. We can introduce fire to remove some of the more fire-sensitive species that compete with our oak forests, our oak and our hickory forest. We can also look, if we have to, enrichment plantings, planting seedlings in an existing forest where natural regeneration hasn't occurred, or afforestation, planting seedlings in abandoned open fields. Something that's done more east in our eastern states, but it's gaining some popularity over here. Soil scarification, disturbing the forest soil and leaf litter to allow successful germination. That leaf litter is kind of important for providing an insulating blanket to particularly our white oaks, because they germinate in the fall. So they've got to have a little blanket, if you will, for our harsh winter. But because we've excluded fire, and you'll hear more about that later on, that leaf litter might be too deep for that germinating seed to actually then get down and make good soil contact. Different things of that nature. So, successfully, what we want to see as a landowner, we want to see harvesting done when it's appropriate. We want to use prescribed fire as a tool, because what that then does is allow us to then get our oaks going and established. And again, John will go into a lot more detail, and you'll see again, he'll set the groundwork for this, but then you'll hear the same story repeated or emphasized both in Brian's presentation, Frank's presentation. And again, where we want to have an ability to have a wide range of oaks that out there in different size classes, then we can kind of favor not only spatially placing them on the ground, thinning out, but then favoring those ones that are nice and healthy to maintain the vigor of the forest. Management benefits for many species, and I won't go into them here. Frank does an excellent job of talking about these songbirds that at different stages of the forest depend upon management to favor these species. Something more locally that we've got going on here in the state, I'm just going to give a quick shout out. In conjunction, we have a sustainable forestry initiative, and these are some of the cooperators that have joined this initiative, allowing us to hire people, to reach out to landowners, and to develop and to really put in play the White Oak Initiative here in Missouri. Some of the products we've had in a number, we're placing them in some of our craft distillery operations in the Herman and the River Hills area, and some of our wineries, talking about both the benefits, the wildlife benefits, but also the need for doing what we're talking about. We have a poster that will, in a nutshell, give you everything that I've just talked about. And these are some of our outreach tools we're using at various events. But the big challenge is this. Forested acres in Missouri is about 15.5 million acres. The public only owns 18%. Privately, 82% is privately owned. And two large landowner groups, and also then 90% of the harvested trees come from private forest lands. So family forest landowners are a big player and a key part in this cornerstone species. They're, I guess you could say, a cornerstone or a keystone species in their own right. Woodland retreat owners, those are what we call our recreational landowners. 45% of those make up that, and they make up about a third of that private forest land acres. The other large group are supplemental income folks that are working the forest. Again, about a quarter of them make up that as far as number wise, and about a third. So 2/3 of these two groups are the folks we're trying to reach. There might be one of you, viewing the webinars, and represent a sizable chunk that we need to address and help start moving that needle for weeding the garden. Landowner engagement, going back to extension, that's our why. That's my why. We love stories. Everyone has their own story to tell, whether it's the Brundage's family, Scott, the legacy he started up in Adair County, the Murphys up in Lewis County, John Lee over in Davies County, and Mark Nussbaum down there in Bollinger. They're all they have great stories to tell and how they got into actually managing their woods. And it's kind of like the boy throwing the starfish in. And if we can engage one landowner or improve 1 acre of land, then I feel our job is accomplished. That's our goal. And we can't worry about everything we can't change, but what we can change and impact. And we hope that's what this webinar series will start enabling us to do, to reach more of those folks out there wanting to do something constructive on their land. Again, this just kind of shows the folks that participated in our webinar series live. Some of you all that might be viewing this for the first time that couldn't participate in all of our webinars. But again, this just kind of shows it's across the state, whether it's those landowners there that were in the brown counties, if you will, those ones in the green, those represent some of where our resource professionals were also located. So I hope that kind of sets the stage for the other presentations you're going to be seeing. I want to thank you for listening to this. I'll leave you with the Williamson, or otherwise known as the McBain Bur Oak. This is one where estimated age, 380 years old, 74 feet to the high, 94-inch diameter. That's actual diameter, and a canopy spread of over 129 feet. If you haven't seen the Bur Oak, it's along the Katy Trail, easy to get to. Go down, encourage you to look at this phenomenal specimen. It is a national champion. And here's my contact information that you can reach out to me at any time, whether or not it's something in particular about this session or any of the other sessions, webinar presentations you'll be viewing. As we say, Missouri Extension, MU Extension, we serve Missouri and deliver Mizzou. And for that, I'll close, and thank you for listening.